I met Lily on one of those rainy days that makes you want to stay in bed. I was running late to a coffee shop to meet an old college friend, grumbling under my breath about my soaked shoes, when I saw her. She was sitting by the window, hair slightly damp from the rain, completely absorbed in sketching something in her notebook. I didn't even know her name, but something about her made the world seem a little less dreary. As luck would have it, my friend ended up being late too, which gave me plenty of time to notice her. Every now and then, she'd pause and bite the end of her pencil, staring out at the rain before diving back into her sketch. Finally, I mustered the courage to say something, some terrible excuse to start a conversation. I joked that she had picked the best seat in the place, right by the window, and she looked up with this warm smile that instantly made me forget every word I'd planned to say. It turned out that Lily was sketching ideas for a mural project she wanted to propose at the local community center. We ended up talking for nearly an hour before my friend finally showed up, and even then, I couldn't take my eyes, or my thoughts, off her. When I left that day, I somehow worked up the nerve to ask for her number, and to my amazement, she gave it to me with that same radiant smile. Our first date was at an art gallery she loved, a small, quiet place tucked away downtown. It wasn't my usual scene, I was more of a movies and burgers guy, but seeing how her eyes lit up as she explained the story behind each painting made me fall for her even harder. She had this passion for life that was magnetic, and before I knew it, I was following her to every gallery opening, outdoor festival, and quirky exhibit she suggested. What surprised me the most, though, was how easy it all felt. Lily wasn't just fun and creative, she was genuine. There were no games, no pretenses. She told me about her favorite childhood memories, the little bookstore she used to visit every Saturday, and how she'd always dreamed of becoming an artist. And she listened, really listened, when I told her about myself, even the parts one wasn't particularly proud of. By the third date, I knew I was hooked. By the fifth, I was calling her my girlfriend. And by the time we'd been together for a few months, I couldn't imagine my life without her. Lily and I didn't just start dating, we sort of tumbled into it like we were characters in a rom-com and neither of us knew we were starring in. After that first coffee shop meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I spent days staring at my phone, wondering if I should text her, debating if I should play it cool or risk looking too eager. Ultimately, I landed on a simple message, "Hey Lily, it's me, the guy from the coffee shop. Any chance you're free for a mural consultation over coffee?" To my relief, she replied almost instantly, "Only if you promise not to judge my sketches too harshly." That weekend, we met at the same coffee shop. She brought her notebook, and I brought what little charm I could muster. We talked for hours again, about everything from her favorite artists to her most embarrassing high school moments. Somewhere between her laugh and the way she lit up while describing the mural project, I realized I wasn't just interested in her art, I was falling for her. After that, things snowballed. We started texting every day, sharing music recommendations and swapping stories about our lives. I learned that Lily had grown up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, and that moving to the city had been her dream for as long as she could remember. She told me about her first art teacher, who made her believe she had something special, and her dad, who would bring her a new sketchbook every Christmas. She painted this vivid picture of herself, and every detail made me want to know more. Our first official date was, fittingly, a picnic in the park. Lily had insisted on doing things differently, and I didn't argue. She packed a basket full of sandwiches, fruit, and her homemade cookies, which she claimed were an acquired taste. Spoiler, they were incredible. We spent the whole afternoon lounging on a blanket, watching clouds drift by, and laughing until our sides hurt. It was simple, but it felt perfect. In the months that followed, being with Lily felt like the easiest thing in the world. We fell into this natural rhythm, like we'd been a team forever. She'd surprise me with little sketches she'd make of us, her way of capturing our favorite moments, and I'd cook her dinner, despite my very limited culinary skills. I can't count how many times she teased me for overcooking the pasta, but she always ate it anyway, smiling at me like I'd made a 5-star meal. What really stood out about those early days was how much Lily cared about the people around her. She was the kind of person who'd notice if someone at a party seemed uncomfortable and make it her mission to include them. She once spent an entire Saturday helping a coworker move, even though she had zero stake in it. That's just who she was, someone who gave, and gave, and gave. And she gave so much to me. Lily encouraged me to chase my own dreams, even the ones I'd put on the back burner. I'd always loved photography, but I'd never pursued it seriously. One day, out of nowhere, she handed me a wrapped box. Inside was a used DSLR camera she'd found online. "It's not top of the line," she said, "but it's good enough for someone as talented as you." That was Lily, a cheerleader for everyone she cared about, making you feel like you could take on the world. By our 3-month anniversary, I was head over heels. I wasn't just dating someone, I was building something real. We'd talked about our goals, our families, and even the kind of life we wanted to create. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what it feels like to find your person. If you were to see Lily and me back then, you'd probably think we were a perfect match, and in so many ways, we were. But no relationship is without its quirks, and ours wasn't an exception. Beneath all the laughter, compatibility, and love, there were definitely cracks in our foundation. Nothing too big, nothing that seemed unfixable. Just little things that quietly lurked in the background, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. For me, my biggest flaw was that I had this tendency to avoid confrontation like the plague. I hated fighting, hated even the smallest argument. I was the guy who would apologize for things just to keep the peace, even if I wasn't in the wrong. It wasn't because I didn't care, it was because I cared too much. I didn't want to upset Lily or risk jeopardizing what we had, so I kept a lot of my thoughts to myself. If something bothered me, I'd bury it deep down and hope it would work itself out. Spoiler alert, it usually didn't. Lily, on the other hand, was almost too idealistic. She believed the world could always be better, and she poured herself into fixing everything and everyone around her. It was one of the things I loved most about her, but it also had a downside. She could get so caught up in helping others that she sometimes forgot to take care of herself, or us. There were moments when I felt like I was competing for her attention, not against another person but against her endless projects, causes, and plans. She wasn't great at admitting when she was wrong either. Don't get me wrong, Lily wasn't arrogant or stubborn in the traditional sense. She just had this unwavering belief that if she was doing something, it must be for the right reasons. If I brought up an issue, she'd often deflect or convince herself it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't malicious, but it could be frustrating, especially when I was already bad at addressing problems to begin with. Our different ways of dealing with conflict led to some interesting dynamics. Like the time we got into our first real argument about her work-life balance. She'd taken on a volunteer project that consumed her evenings for weeks, and I barely saw her outside of a quick good night before we both passed out. I finally worked up the courage to tell her how I felt, and she brushed it off, saying, "I thought you'd be proud of me for helping people." That hit hard. I was proud of her, but I also wanted to feel like I mattered, too. Instead of pushing the issue, I just let it go, convincing myself I was being selfish for even bringing it up. Then there was my need for reassurance. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had this deep-seated insecurity about whether I was enough for her. Lily was this bright, beautiful, driven person who could have had anyone, and I couldn't help but wonder why she chose me. I tried not to let it show, but there were times when my own doubts would creep into the relationship in subtle ways. If she spent too much time with her friends or didn't reply to my texts right away, I'd start overthinking. Did she love me as much as I loved her? Was I really what she wanted? For all our flaws, we had a way of balancing each other out. Her optimism often pulled me out of my darker moments, and my steady, dependable nature grounded her when she got too carried away. But sometimes, our shortcomings fed into each other in ways we didn't realize. My tendency to avoid confrontation paired with her habit of brushing things off meant that small problems stayed small, until they didn't. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference. And my insecurities, though unspoken, sometimes made me see issues where there weren't any, while her idealism made her blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Still, at the time, it didn't feel like any of this would ever be a deal-breaker. We loved each other, and that was enough. Or at least, I told myself it was. After all, what relationship doesn't have its bumps? I thought we could weather anything, that these tiny flaws were just that, tiny. And maybe they would have stayed that way, if everything else hadn't happened. But life has a way of sneaking up on you, of turning those small cracks into something much bigger. At the time, though, I couldn't see it. All I saw was Lily, the woman who made me laugh, made me dream, made me believe that we had forever ahead of us. Lily's parents were an interesting pair, to say the least. Her mom, Celia, was sweet and warm, the kind of person who made you feel like family the second you walked through her door. She was always ready with a plate of cookies and a story about something embarrassing Lily had done as a kid. Her dad, Richard, though, he was a different story. The first time I met Richard, he shook my hand like he was testing my grip strength, staring me down like I just confessed to a felony. I'm not sure if it was because I wasn't the kind of guy he pictured for Lily or if he was just naturally standoffish, but the vibe was unmistakable. I wasn't good enough for his daughter. "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice clipped. I answered, trying to sound confident. "Born and raised in the city." He nodded, then followed up with, "What do you do for a living?" "I work in marketing," I said. "Brand development." Richard's eyebrows shot up slightly, and I could tell he wasn't impressed. "Marketing, huh? I suppose someone's got to sell things." The tension hung in the air like an unwelcome guest, but before it could get worse, Celia swooped in to save the day. "Oh, stop it, Richard. He's charming. And he brought flowers." She beamed at me, and I silently thanked her for the assist. Lily had warned me about her dad before the meeting, saying he was a bit of a character, but it still caught me off guard. That night, as we drove home, she held my hand and laughed. "Don't take it personally. Dad's just intense. He's protective in his own weird way." "I can see that," I said. "But does he have to look at me like I just insulted his entire family?" She grinned. "It's his thing. He'll warm up to you eventually. Trust me." Over time, Richard didn't exactly warm up to me, but he stopped giving me the third degree every time we saw each other. I learned to take his gruffness in stride, even when it bordered on outright dismissiveness. Celia more than made up for it, though. She loved me from the start, treating me like the son she never had. Sometimes I wondered if that bothered Richard, but if it did, he never let on. Then there was Lily's best friend, Sophie. Now, Sophie was complicated. She and Lily had been friends since middle school, so their bond was practically unshakable. Sophie was fun and outgoing, but there was always an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite put my finger on when it came to her feelings about me. The first time I met Sophie, she greeted me with a playful jab. "So, you're the guy stealing my girl away," she said, smirking as she looked me up and down. "I hope you know what you've got, because if you screw it up, you'll have me to deal with." I laughed it off, thinking she was just being protective. But over time, I noticed little things. The way she'd interrupt Lily and me when we were in the middle of a moment, or how she'd make comments like, "Lily, remember when it was just the two of us? Simpler times." She never said anything outright hostile, but there was always this sense that I was an outsider in their dynamic. One evening, about a year into our relationship, we all went out for drinks. Sophie had had one too many margaritas and started reminiscing loudly about their high school days. Lily used to date this guy, Jason, she said, grinning mischievously. You remember him, right? He was so dreamy. The whole school was jealous of you too. Lily shot her a look. Sophie, seriously? What? I'm just saying. Jason was, like, the ultimate boyfriend. I chuckled awkwardly, not sure how to respond. Well, I guess I've got big shoes to fill. Sophie raised her glass. You sure do, buddy. That night, as Lily and I walked home, I brought it up. What's Sophie's deal? Does she not like me or something? Lily sighed. Sophie's just. Sophie. She doesn't mean anything by it. She has a habit of saying things without thinking. Yeah, but it feels like she's trying to stir the pot. She's protective, that's all. She's used to being the most important person in my life. But she likes you. She really does. I wanted to believe her, but something about Sophie's energy always felt a little off. It was like she was testing me, waiting for me to slip up. It wasn't enough to cause a fight, but it lingered in the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Looking back, I wonder if there was more to it, if Sophie knew something I didn't, or if she just saw things I was too blinded by love to notice. At the time, though, I chalked it up to her overprotectiveness and let it go. After all, Lily and I were solid. Nothing could shake us. Lily had always been an artist at heart. When we first started dating, she'd often mention how much she loved sketching people's faces, capturing not just their likeness but their expressions, their emotions, their stories. She had this knack for finding beauty in the smallest details, the curve of a smile, the crinkle around someone's eyes when they laughed. It was like she saw the world in a way most people couldn't. I've always wanted to learn how to do portraits properly, she told me one evening as we sprawled out on the couch. She was flipping through an old sketchbook, showing me some of her earlier work. Not just quick sketches, but the real deal. Like those classic, timeless portraits you see in galleries. I encouraged her, of course. You're already amazing, I said, meaning every word. But if that's your dream, you should go for it. She laughed and shook her head. Yeah, maybe in another life. Those schools are expensive, and I can't exactly quit my job to become the next Picasso. It wasn't just the cost, though. Lily had a habit of putting other people's needs before her own, and her dream of studying art always seemed to get pushed to the back burner. She'd say things like, maybe someday, but I could tell she didn't really believe it would happen. That all changed about a year ago. Lily stumbled across an ad for a local portrait painting studio that offered evening classes. The studio had a reputation for being one of the best in the city, run by a well-known artist who'd studied abroad. It wasn't a full-time program, just a small, focused class for people who wanted to hone their skills. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference. The kind of place that could open doors to bigger opportunities. I don't know, she said when she first showed me the ad. It's a lot of money for just a few months. Lily, you've been talking about this for years, I said. If you don't do it now, when will you? We'll figure out the money. Besides, it's not just a class, it's an investment in you. She hesitated, as she always did when it came to spending money on herself, but I could see the spark in her eyes. That little glimmer of hope and excitement. You really think I should? She asked. I know you should, I said. You deserve this. So, we worked it out. We tightened our budget, skipped a few dinners out, and made it happen. When she got the email confirming her acceptance into the program, you would have thought she'd just won the lottery. She ran into the room, practically vibrating with excitement, waving her phone in the air. I got in, she shouted, tackling me in a hug. I actually got in. Her classes started 6 months ago, on Friday nights. The timing was perfect, it gave her something to look forward to at the end of the workweek, and we still had the weekends to spend together. At first, she was nervous, worrying that her skills wouldn't measure up to the other students. But within a few weeks, she was coming home with this newfound confidence, telling me about the techniques she was learning and the people she'd met. She even showed me some of her early assignments, little studies of facial features, eyes, lips, noses. "It's harder than it looks," she'd say, holding up a sketch for my approval. But to me, it was incredible. I couldn't understand half the technical stuff she explained, but I could see how much she was growing as an artist. The studio became her happy place, and I loved seeing her so passionate about something. She'd talk about the instructor, a man named Adrian, who had a reputation for being demanding but brilliant. She admired his talent and said his critiques were always spot on, pushing her to improve in ways she hadn't thought possible. I was proud of her, proud that she was chasing her dream, proud that she was putting herself out there. Every Friday, I'd drop her off at the studio, kiss her goodbye, and tell her to have fun. "Don't wait up," she'd say with a grin, knowing I probably would anyway. Those evenings became part of our routine, and I never once questioned what was happening inside that studio. Why would I? Lily was living her dream, and I was just happy to be the guy supporting her along the way. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. Lily was still the same vibrant, thoughtful person she'd always been, or at least, that's what I told myself. She'd come home from her Friday night classes buzzing with stories about the studio, showing me her sketches and telling me about her progress. She seemed happy, energized even, and I was thrilled to see her thriving. But after a few months, little things started to shift. Nothing dramatic, just subtle changes that were easy to brush off if I wasn't paying attention. She started staying late after her classes, saying she was helping clean up or chatting with classmates. It didn't bother me at first. If anything, I was glad she was making friends and feeling comfortable in the studio environment. Then, her enthusiasm began to fade, almost imperceptibly. When I'd ask about her latest assignment, her answers grew shorter, more generic. "It's fine," she'd say, or "just some practice sketches." The long, detailed explanations she used to give me were replaced with vague comments, as though she didn't want to talk about it. Her energy at home changed, too. Lily had always been the kind of person who filled a room with her presence, but now she seemed distant. Distracted. I'd catch her staring off into space during dinner, or scrolling through her phone with a slight frown. When I asked what was on her mind, she'd shrug it off. "Nothing, just tired," she'd say, offering a weak smile. At first, I believed her. She was balancing work, art classes, and everything else. Of course she was tired. But the distance between us kept growing. She stopped planning our spontaneous weekend adventures, opting instead to sleep in or stay home. Even when we were together, it felt like her mind was somewhere else. One night, I brought it up, trying to tread carefully. "You've been quiet lately," I said as we sat on the couch. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm just overwhelmed, I guess. The class is more intense than I expected, and work's been a lot. Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked, genuinely wanting to ease her stress. "No, it's fine," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "I'll be okay." I wanted to press her, to dig deeper, but something in her tone made me hold back. Maybe she really was just overwhelmed. Maybe I was overthinking it. I convinced myself that this was just a phase, that she'd bounce back once things settled down. But as the weeks went on, her mood didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. She started pulling away, both physically and emotionally. Hugs felt shorter, kisses felt mechanical, and our conversations grew shallow, like we were avoiding anything too personal. I tried to close the gap, planning date nights and little surprises, but nothing seemed to reach her. I remember one evening in particular. I'd cooked her favorite meal, something I wasn't great at, but I'd practiced just to make her smile. When she walked through the door, I greeted her with a grin, holding up the plate like a trophy. "Tada! Dinner is served." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks," she said quietly, sitting down at the table. She barely touched her food, pushing it around with her fork while I tried to fill the silence with small talk. "You okay?" I finally asked. "Yeah, just not that hungry," she replied, avoiding my gaze. It was the same answer she gave to everything lately: "I'm fine, I'm just tired, I'm overwhelmed." I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she said it felt off. Like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I told myself it was stress. That the class, her job, and life in general were weighing on her. I tried to be patient, to give her space while still being there for her. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the mood changes, it was the way she avoided eye contact, the way she pulled her hand away just a little too quickly when I reached for it. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe she was going through something she wasn't ready to share, and I didn't want to push her. But looking back, I wonder if I should have seen the signs. If I should have asked harder questions or been less willing to accept her excuses. A few months ago, I suggested we take a vacation. Things had felt tense between us, and I thought some time away might be just what we needed to reconnect. Lily loved the idea, at least, she seemed to. Her face lit up when I mentioned the beach, and she said, "It's been so long since we just relaxed together. Let's do it." We planned the trip to a small coastal town about 3 hours away, a place we'd never been but had always talked about visiting. The promise of sandy shores, sunsets, and no responsibilities was exactly what I thought we needed. I booked a cozy little cabin near the water, with a private deck that overlooked the ocean. It was picture-perfect, the kind of place you'd see in a travel magazine. When the day finally came, I packed the car while Lily scrambled to get her things together. She seemed a little frazzled, more than usual for a simple trip, but I chalked it up to excitement. "Don't forget your sketchbook," I teased, hoping she'd use the downtime to draw like she used to. "Oh, right," she said, grabbing it from the coffee table. She hesitated for a second, then added her phone charger to the bag, giving me a quick, tight smile. The drive there was fine, mostly filled with small talk and music. But I noticed that every time we stopped for gas or food, Lily was glued to her phone. She'd be scrolling or typing away, barely looking up even when I tried to start a conversation. I figured she was just tying up loose ends before vacation mode kicked in, so I didn't say anything. When we arrived at the cabin, the view was even better than the photos. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the ocean, and the air smelled like salt and pine. I set our bags down, eager to soak it all in, but Lily immediately pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. "Come look at this view," I called, standing on the deck. "It's incredible." "Yeah, it's beautiful," she replied, barely glancing up from her screen. "Hang on, I just need to post something. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference." That set the tone for the rest of the trip. Every morning, I'd wake up early, hoping to watch the sunrise with her, but she'd stay in bed, scrolling through her phone. Even when she finally got up, her attention seemed split between me and whatever was happening on her screen. We'd go out for breakfast or take a walk along the beach, but every few minutes, her phone would buzz, and she'd stop to check it. At first, I tried to make light of it. "You're going to run out of battery if you keep that up," I joked. She smiled, but it felt forced. "I'm just checking a few things. You know how it is." But it wasn't just a few things. It was constant. Even during meals, when we were supposed to be enjoying the moment, her phone was always within arm's reach. She'd glance at it every few minutes, her fingers typing away while I tried to fill the silence. "Who are you texting so much?" I asked one evening as we sat on the deck, watching the waves crash against the shore. "Oh, just Sophie," she said quickly. She's going through something, and I'm trying to be there for her. I nodded, not wanting to seem unsupportive. Sophie was her best friend, after all. But something about her answer didn't sit right. She seemed evasive, like she didn't want to elaborate. And it wasn't just that one time. Every time I asked about her phone, she'd brush it off with a vague explanation: work emails, group chats, catching up on news. By midweek, I was starting to feel the weight of it. This trip was supposed to bring us closer, but instead, it felt like we were farther apart than ever. I tried to make the best of it, planning activities and suggesting we unplug for a day. No phones, no screens, I said. Just us and the ocean. She hesitated, then laughed nervously. I don't know if I can survive without my phone for a whole day. I smiled, trying to keep things light. I think you'll manage. But she never actually went along with it. Her phone stayed by her side, like an uninvited guest on our trip. Even at night, when we'd sit by the fire pit, I'd catch her checking it under the table, the screen lighting up her face in the darkness. By the time we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lily wasn't acting like herself, and I didn't know why. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe she was stressed or distracted by something she hadn't shared yet. But deep down, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that there was more to it. Still, I didn't want to believe it. After all, this was Lily, my Lily. When we got back from the vacation, I thought things would settle down. Vacations can be stressful in their own way: packing, planning, being in a new place. I figured once we were back in the comfort of our apartment, Lily would go back to being herself, and we could get past the weird tension that had been hanging over us all week. But instead of improving, things got worse. Lily seemed more distant than ever. She was quieter, more withdrawn, like she was constantly lost in thought. I'd try to ask her about her day, and her answers were short, almost robotic. It was fine, she'd say, barely looking up from her phone. I started to feel like I was living with a stranger, not the woman I'd spent the last 2.5 years building a life with. And then there was the phone. If I thought her attachment to it during the vacation was bad, it reached a whole new level when we got back. She had it with her at all times, even when we were just sitting on the couch watching TV. It was always in her hand or within reach, and she'd glance at it constantly, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was catching up on work, or maybe Sophie really was going through something that required her constant attention. But as the days went on, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. She started taking her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom, a habit she never had before. And when I walked into a room, she'd quickly turn the screen off or put the phone face down on the table. It felt like a wall had gone up between us, and I couldn't figure out why. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd dismiss it. "You're overthinking things," she'd say with a little laugh. "I'm just busy." But it didn't feel like she was just busy. It felt like she was hiding something. That's when the jealousy started creeping in. I've never been the jealous type, not really. Lily and I had always trusted each other completely, and I'd never had a reason to doubt her before. But now, I couldn't stop the thoughts from spiraling in my head. Who was she texting all the time? Why was she being so secretive? Was there someone else? I hated feeling like this, like I was turning into someone I didn't recognize. I didn't want to be the guy who snooped through his girlfriend's stuff or questioned her every move. But the more she pulled away, the harder it was to keep my doubts at bay. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before, like how she'd get dressed up for her Friday night art class, putting on more makeup than usual and choosing outfits she'd never worn to class before. One night, as she was getting ready to leave, I couldn't help myself. "You look nice," I said, trying to sound casual. "A little fancy for the studio, don't you think?" She glanced at me in the mirror, her expression unreadable. "It's nothing special. Just felt like dressing up. Doesn't seem like nothing, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. You've been putting a lot of effort into those Friday nights lately. She turned to face me, her brow furrowing. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said quickly, backing off. Forget I said anything. But the seed had been planted, and the rest of the evening was tense. She left for class without so much as a goodbye kiss, and I sat on the couch, stewing in my own thoughts. I hated feeling this way, but I couldn't shake it. The doubts, the suspicions, the jealousy, it was like a storm brewing inside me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I started keeping an eye on her in ways I never had before. I'd casually glance at her phone screen when she was texting, trying to catch a name or a snippet of a conversation. I'd ask subtle questions about her art class, hoping she'd slip up and reveal something. But Lily was careful, too careful. Her answers were always vague, her demeanor always calm, like she had nothing to hide. One evening, I caught her smiling at her phone, a soft, private smile I hadn't seen in months. My stomach twisted, and I blurted out, "Who are you texting?" She looked up, startled. "What? Who are you texting?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sophie," she said, holding up her phone as if to prove it. "What's with the third degree?" "I'm just asking," I said, forcing a laugh. "You've been glued to that thing lately. I can't even get your attention." She sighed, her expression shifting to something close to annoyance. "I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to stop." "I'm not doing anything wrong." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the tension between us was undeniable, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the doubts kept growing. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering, waiting for something, or someone, to push me over. That Friday started like any other. Lily was getting ready for her class, meticulously tying her hair back and gathering her sketchbook and pencils. She looked beautiful, as always, but something about her felt unreachable, like she was miles away even though she was standing right in front of me. I wanted to say something, to ask if she was okay, but I held back. We'd been walking on eggshells lately, and I didn't want to set her off before she left. As she grabbed her bag and headed for the door, I stopped her. "Hey, do you need a ride tonight?" She shook her head without hesitation. "No, it's fine. Sophie's picking me up. We're grabbing coffee before class." I nodded, forcing a smile. "All right. Have fun." But as soon as the door closed behind her, something in my gut twisted. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to distract myself, flipping through TV channels, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, but the unease only grew stronger. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference. Finally, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. Without overthinking it, I grabbed my car keys and drove to the studio. When I got there, the building was dark except for the light spilling out from one of the rooms on the second floor. I recognized Lily's car parked nearby, and my heart started to race. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe she really was just at class, sketching portraits like she said. I almost turned around and went home, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pushed me forward. I stepped inside the building, the quiet hum of my footsteps on the linoleum floor echoing in the empty hallway. As I climbed the stairs, I heard faint voices coming from the room at the end. My chest tightened with each step, my mind racing through all the possibilities. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, that I'd walk in and find Lily focused on her sketchpad, lost in her art. But when I reached the doorway and looked inside, my world shattered. Lily wasn't sitting at an easel, pencil in hand. She was standing in the middle of the room, completely naked, her skin glowing under the soft overhead light. Across from her, a man sat at an easel, his brush moving deliberately across the canvas as he painted her. His expression was focused, almost reverent, like he was capturing something sacred. And then, as if the scene couldn't get any worse, he set down his brush, stood up, and walked over to her. Without hesitation, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It wasn't a casual kiss or a quick peck. It was intimate, deep, full of a passion that made my stomach churn. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in, my head spinning as I tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't some innocent mistake. Lily, the woman I'd loved and trusted for years, was here, with him, doing this. I wanted to storm in, to shout, to demand answers. But instead, I froze. My feet felt glued to the floor, my hands trembling as I gripped the doorframe for support. I don't know how long I stood there, watching, before the realization finally hit me: this wasn't the Lily I thought I knew. The woman I'd built my life around, who I believed in with every fiber of my being, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. I turned and walked out, my vision blurred with tears, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I don't even remember driving home. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same. I barely remember getting home that night. Everything felt like a haze, like I was moving through someone else's life. The apartment, the space we'd built together, suddenly felt foreign, suffocating. Every photo on the walls, every piece of furniture we'd picked out, felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of the life I thought we had. A life that had crumbled in an instant. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, my mind looping the image of Lily and that man over and over again. I felt sick. Angry. Heartbroken. A part of me wanted to confront her right away, to demand answers, to scream and shout and force her to explain how she could do this to me, to us. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what to say, how to even begin to process what had just happened. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, and before I knew it, the door opened. Lily walked in, her face glowing with that same light I used to love, the light I now knew wasn't for me. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her bag on the floor, and smiled at me like everything was normal. "Hey," she said casually, pulling her hair into a messy bun. "You're still up?" I nodded, unable to find the words. She didn't seem to notice my silence, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. She headed to the bathroom, humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. When she finally came to bed, she kissed my cheek and whispered, "Good night." It was the same routine we'd shared 100 times before, but it felt hollow, like an echo of something that no longer existed. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the studio over and over again. The way he looked at her, the way she let him kiss her. It didn't matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, there was no explanation that made it hurt any less. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't sit across from her at the breakfast table, pretending everything was fine, pretending I didn't know. I needed to leave. Not just for my own sanity, but because staying would only prolong the inevitable. Whatever we had was over, and there was no coming back from this. While Lily was still asleep, I started packing my things. I worked quietly, careful not to wake her, but my hands trembled with every item I placed in the suitcase. I didn't take much, just the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal belongings. The rest could wait. Right now, I just needed to get out. As I zipped up the suitcase, I glanced around the room one last time. The photos on the dresser, the painting on the wall, the little trinkets we'd collected on vacations, they all felt meaningless now. Just empty symbols of a love that had been shattered. I left the keys on the counter, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out the door without looking back. For a few days after I left, I stayed with a friend. I didn't tell him everything, just that Lily and I had broken up and I needed some space. He didn't press for details, which I was grateful for. I couldn't bear to say the words out loud, to relive the moment I walked into that studio and saw everything fall apart. I blocked Lily's number almost immediately after leaving. I knew if I didn't, I'd be tempted to answer her calls, to listen to her excuses, and I wasn't ready for that. I needed time to process, to figure out how to move forward without her. But blocking her didn't stop her from trying to reach me. First, she showed up at my friend's apartment. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, when there was a knock at the door. My friend opened it, and there she was, Lily, holding a bag of my favorite takeout, her face a mix of worry and confusion. "Is he here?" she asked, peering around my friend to try to see inside. He glanced back at me, and I shook my head, silently pleading for him to send her away. "He doesn't want to talk right now," he said firmly. "I think you should go." Lily's voice cracked. "But I don't understand. He just left. No explanation, no note, nothing. I don't even know what I did." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. She doesn't know what she did? The sheer audacity of it made my chest tighten. But I stayed silent, rooted to the couch, letting my friend handle it. "He needs time," my friend said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Give him that." Lily didn't argue, but she left the takeout on the doorstep. When the door closed, I sat there for a long time, staring at the bag. It was such a Lily thing to do, trying to fix a broken heart with food, as if a favorite meal could erase what had happened. Over the next week, she tried reaching out in every way she could. She sent emails, each one more desperate than the last, begging me to talk to her, to tell her what had gone wrong. "I don't understand," one email read. "Please, just tell me what I did. If it's something I said, I can fix it. If it's something I did, I'll never do it again. I love you. Please come home." Every message chipped away at my resolve, but I knew I couldn't respond. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face her, to hear her excuses or apologies. Then she started reaching out to my family. My mom called me one night, her voice cautious. "Lily came by the house today," she said. "She's worried about you. She says she doesn't know why you left." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "She knows, Mom. Trust me, she knows." My mom hesitated. "Are you sure?" Because she seemed genuinely upset. "She said you just disappeared, and she's been trying to reach you ever since." "She's lying," I said, my voice hard. "Or she's pretending not to understand. Either way, I don't want to talk to her." My mom didn't push, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? I hadn't told anyone the truth. It wasn't something I wanted to share, not yet, maybe not ever. The hardest part was knowing that Lily's confusion wasn't entirely fake. She probably didn't think she'd done anything wrong, not in the way I saw it. In her mind, posing for that man, letting him kiss her, it might not have felt like a betrayal. But to me, it was. It was the ultimate breach of trust, the shattering of everything we'd built together. She didn't understand why I left because she didn't see what she'd done as wrong. And that hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Weeks turned into months, and Lily's attempts to contact me gradually faded. The emails stopped, the calls to my family ceased, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. But the silence didn't bring the closure I thought it would. Instead, it left a hollow ache, a space where our life together had been. I threw myself into building a new routine, working more hours, hitting the gym, reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my time with Lily. I wanted to move forward, to heal, but no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the memories of her lingered. The laughter, the adventures, the plans we'd made, they were ghosts I couldn't quite shake. Every now and then, I'd hear through mutual friends that Lily was still living in the city, trying to piece her life back together. She'd moved into a small studio apartment and, apparently, had quit the portrait class altogether. I don't know if it was because of guilt or shame, but a part of me hoped it was because she realized what she'd lost. Then, one day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short, just a single sentence: "I'm so sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay." For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I knew it was from her, I'd know her words, her tone, anywhere. But instead of feeling anger or pain, I felt nothing. Just a quiet, calm acceptance that whatever we'd had was over, and nothing she could say would change that. I didn't respond. There was no point. We'd said everything we needed to say, even if most of it had been left unsaid. That chapter of my life was closed, and I wasn't going to reopen it, not for her, not for anyone. Now, months later, I've started to feel like myself again. I've even gone on a few dates, though nothing serious yet. It's strange, learning how to trust again, how to open myself up after everything that happened. But I know I'll get there, one step at a time. As for Lily, I wish her well, truly. I hope she finds whatever it is she's looking for, even if it wasn't me. But the truth is, some mistakes can't be undone, and some relationships can't be repaired. And that's okay. Sometimes, walking away is the best thing you can do, for yourself and for the person you thought you'd spend forever with. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the ending I needed. And now, I'm ready to start writing the next chapter of my life. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference.